Hi everyone, and welcome to this series of small introductions to different parts of Agile and Agile ways of working. This first part is about why Agile is a thing at all and where did it come from. And just to make it clear for everyone at the start, this part is actually more of a history lesson and not necessarily something you need to understand how to use Agile. So if you're not really that interested into the background of it, feel free to skip this one and move on to part 2 immediately. But for those of you who want to know more, let's go. So why Agile is the first question. Why is Agile a thing at all? Well, Agile came about because of this struggle that many of the projects that are run in the industry of software development, because that's where Agile came from, struggle with balancing these three things. It's often called the iron triangle, where you have to balance between cost, scope, and time. And the challenge is that often in software development, time and cost is very close to each other. It's mostly about manpower, not really a lot of machinery involved. So what we have in those cases is that we can either tell you exactly what something is going to cost, but then you don't really know exactly what you will get. Or we can tell you exactly what you will get, but then we can't upfront tell you exactly what it will cost. As long as we're not doing something we've done hundreds of times before, there will be an element of uncertainty in doing a new thing. The non-agile approach to doing this would be to create a big Gantt chart, a big project plan for all the actions needed to create the idea into the thing. And anyone who's ever tried to work according to one of these knows that it is possible to create one of these, but it's very hard to follow them. Because after a few weeks, something will have shifted and then the whole plan needs to be shifted along with that change. Either we missed something or we learned something new that forced us to change how we do things. So in software development, we used to have this way of working. First, someone specified what we were supposed to build, wrote the specification, requirements, document, and handed it over to a team that started coding and building the thing. That team built and built and built, and then handed it over to the next team who were supposed to test the thing, comparing the specification with what was delivered and finding faults. And then it was handed over to a fourth team who took care of the delivery into the production systems. This often happened to be more like a relay race than anything else. You pass this relay race stick between the different teams. But often it was not really a relay race stick, but more a dynamite stick, because somewhere along the line this project blew up. And then blame started to get shifted around between the different teams. No one was really looking at the whole picture from idea to finished product. We want to, with these agile ways of working, increase transparency, because often transparency is lacking. And it's illustrated a little bit humorous, with a little bit of humor in this comic strip, where the first two parts of the comic strip explains or showcases how the project is being discussed within the project team. And the last part of the comic strip is when management comes along. Everything is fine, all good, green lights in the project reports until the very end, because we don't want to be too transparent, because we know we will get punished for it. And this is a thing that has been going on forever. These are just two very dramatic examples of this, where we have the Vasa ship on the left-hand side, where we had those building the boat telling the people commissioning the boat that you couldn't build a boat this high, it would tip over. But the people who commissioned the boat were tied to the king, who wanted a very grandiose ship. So they said, just go ahead and build it. And it sank on the first voyage. And the Challenger space shuttle on the right-hand side, we had the same situation where some technicians knew that you had issues with the launch in very cold weather, with an O-ring in one of the booster rockets. They tried to tell their bosses to postpone the launch, but unfortunately, they were not listened to, and the launch took place and we had a bad accident. And most often in our working life, most of us don't work with life and death situations like this, but instead it's often about losing return on investment, losing money, wasting time. So this is an example from Sweden from a number of years ago now, where one of the bigger banks in Sweden, SEB, had spent a number of years building a new internet bank, but they had tried to specify everything up front in a time where a lot of things were changing on how the internet worked, how much mobile devices would come into play and so on. So the requirements they wrote up front were not really relevant after a few years of programming. So they had to scrap this project and start over. So what we want to try to find is a way for our customers, or the ones we are working for when we're building something, to find what is the real value they are after and deliver that in steps, or as we like to call it in Agile, increments. So in this case, it's simply illustrated by maybe we have a customer who wants to travel faster than walking. And they might express that as, I want a car. So we can go ahead and try to build a car from the start. It will be really hard and a really long time before we can deliver a finished product, as in the first example. But if we instead focus on the real value that the customer is after, actually moving faster than walking, we can start by providing them a simple solution that gives them a part of that value, and then iterating on that and building something a little bit better each time around, until finally we may come to a car that may not be what the customer even envisioned from the beginning, but still close to the image, but they have gotten some value along the way as well. So this is one of the ways we like to illustrate Agile. So we do this by trying to split how we deliver value, either by features or parts of the company or some other ways to split it, so we can start delivering little pieces of value as the project runs along. So where did this all come from? Well, we like to trace it back to the lean production system that Toyota made famous in the early 50s. A lot of the ideas that we build the Agile ways of working on today comes from that. Then we have a number of steps along the way. I will not go through all of them, but one of the main ones that sort of took this into hyperdrive in the software world was Scrum, which was invented in the mid-1990s and then made popular in the early 2000s, which was something that really took hold of the software development industry, and from there made Agile ways of working very popular. But as you see, there are many things that can be tied into the Agile ways of working, and we're not done yet. This timeline only goes a little bit of the way through the history. There are continuously new things coming out that are tied to this Agile idea. But I like to trace it back all the way to the scientific method, because looking at how that is described, you start by observing something, you learn more about that, you come up with an idea for what you're going to do, you test that idea with some experiments, you learn from what you did, you then make a new observation or a new thesis that you try. So you have this iterative approach to solving a problem that you don't know exactly how to do beforehand. So the concept is not really new at all, and that's of course okay. We don't need to reinvent the wheel if good ideas are out there already. So calling Agile something new and fancy is not really true. It's of course good new practical approaches to how to do this in different industries, but it's not really revolutionary and something that's never been heard before. I worked earlier in my career with a team at Ericsson, a big manufacturer of mobile systems here in Sweden, that talked about how they worked in the 1980s, where hardware guys, mathematics guys, software guys came together, came up with a hypothesis, started trying something, came back and learned from each other, went back and worked together as a cross-functional team to build something completely new in a new industry. They didn't know how to do this beforehand. They had to learn along the way. So there are many different Agile methods, but many of the ones that came from software, they are aligned around what's called the Agile Manifesto. And this is interesting piece of history behind this. There was a number of people from different Agile methodologies who met up in the Rocky Mountains to learn from each other and try to come up with one way of working. But instead they could only come up with these shared principles, but stayed and each individual was sticking to his way of working, but the principles were actually the same. So they came to value working with the people and the interaction between the people rather than the processes and tools. That's more important. Showing working software rather than the perfect documentation, that's more important. Working together with a customer rather than negotiating contracts, again, more important. Responding to change, because we will learn things will have to change, rather than following a plan to the letter, is more important. It doesn't mean that the things on the right are worthless, but the things on the left are more important, more valuable, typically. But Agile, some people like to bring it in as this savior of the world, but unfortunately, I'm here to tell you, it will not fix everything. It will typically drive transparency. So it will show you things that you thought didn't exist, or that someone has worked carefully to hide in your organization. Those things will typically be made transparent. So sometimes Agile ways of working have been people like to think, or people sometimes think that Agile caused a lot of problems. Maybe more often I've seen Agile displace those problems that already existed. So you cannot really ignore them anymore. So looking at what people say out there, this is from something called State of Agile survey that's done every year. This is from the 2022 version. The main reasons for adopting Agile ways of working was to accelerate time to market, deliver more predictably, and lowering risk. Pretty good things and reasons to adopt a new way of working. Main challenges that people faced with doing this is that typically, many times, senior leadership may not have seen Agile when they were more active in the teams, doing the projects, doing the development of hardware, software, whatever. Maybe they are not familiar with this, so they don't really understand some of the fundamental shifts in how you approach this development is when it comes to Agile. If you have a situation where clear priorities are missing, that will also be challenging. But again, that will be challenging without Agile as well. Again, Agile makes it more transparent that is an issue. So when I try to summarize why Agile is a good idea, these are the things I typically list. So for me, if you have a cross-functional team or a team working together on something, the Agile methodologies typically enable support within the team to be faster. People are not stuck in their own trenches, but rather working together on something. Because you do have better awareness of each other's tasks. That's also a knowledge sharing thing, where it comes to how to do things. So junior members of the team can learn from senior members of the team and be better for it. You have transparency around the progress, how you're doing within the team, but also between teams or as an organization. Typically a good thing, because then you can make informed decisions. And then you can also share the plans between the teams, if teams are dependent on each other, for example. You do institutionalize ways of following up on what you have committed to others or to yourself, to learn from that and see if we're continuously overcommitting, for example. Maybe we should start committing less per time period to not make people disappointed. Typically, we also see better throughput, so faster time to market we saw as a benefit. Typically, this is helped by work breakdown structures. So instead of tackling something that's too big, we break it down into smaller pieces and start working through those. These things also lead to more realistic timelines. So we learn from previous projects or previous time periods how much we can do per week or per month, and therefore we can be much more realistic projecting things. Also, transparency around work overload on team and individual level will be there from this way of working. And if we can get the management team to learn from these agile ways of working and actually implement some of them that are applicable on the management level, the alignment towards engineering teams will be strong and will be very helpful for the organization. And that's the end of this first part.